In the forgotten woods of Crescent Hollow, where broken dreams were left to gather dust, a woman named Elowen lived in silence, believing her story had ended. But one stormy night, a wild mustang knocked on her door, not for shelter, but for something far greater. What follows is a journey of healing, trust, and a second chance she never thought she'd deserve. Stay with us, because sometimes the wild doesn't just find you, it saves you. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The storm had rolled in fast over Crescent Hollow, Colorado, a rugged little town cradled by the shadow of the Wolf Pine Mountains. Wind lashed the crooked pines and rain battered the tin rooftops, drumming like impatient fingers against the earth. Lightning laced the sky in jagged threads of silver, illuminating the endless stretch of wilderness beyond the few clustered homes. It was the kind of night that warned wise men and wild creatures alike to stay hidden. Tucked away on the outskirts of Crescent Hollow, far from the gravel main road, stood a small, weathered cabin. It leaned slightly to one side, the porch sagging under years of snow and sun. Inside, Elowen Grace huddled near the crackling hearth, the flames throwing long, restless shadows against the timber walls. Elowen was not the sort of woman one easily forgot. Standing at a modest 5'8", she carried herself with a wiry grace honed by years of riding mustangs and dancing with danger. Her skin, once sun-kissed from endless hours in open arenas, now held a paler tone, tucked under oversized flannel shirts and rugged jeans. Her hair, a mass of wild, honey-brown waves, often tangled across her shoulders like the untrimmed vines choking the forest outside. The deep-set hazel eyes, flecked with gold, had once shone with ambition, but now held a wary stillness, as though expecting disappointment to come knocking at any moment. Elowen's relationship with the world had always been a complicated dance. Once she had been a prodigy, the whisperer of wild hearts, they had called her on the circuits. But after a catastrophic fall during Wyoming's Grand Derby, a twisted saddle, a shattered spine, and a career reduced to dust, Elowen retreated. Praise turned to pity, and the woman who had once tamed wild horses now struggled to tame the chaos within herself. Trust, once easy for her, became brittle. Smiles became rare. Silence, her only true companion. Tonight, she wrapped the silence around herself like armor. An open book rested on her lap, long forgotten, her thumb worrying the ragged edge of a page she had yet to turn. She stared into the fire, mind adrift in memories, the roar of a crowd, the smell of leather and sweat, the sudden sickening snap of bone and dream alike. And then the knock. It was soft at first, almost too light to be noticed over the howling wind. But it came again, steady, deliberate, not the slap of a branch, nor the erratic thud of the storm. Elowen's breath caught. In Crescent Hollow, visitors were rarer than rainbows in winter. She rose slowly, the old timber floor groaning under her weight, and crossed the room. Her fingers brushed the heavy shotgun leaning against the wall, just in case. She cracked the door open, the storm shoving cold air and rain inside. For a moment, she saw nothing but the furious chaos of the night. Then her eyes adjusted. Standing there on the edge of the porch was not a person, not a man, not a traveler, not a lost hunter. It was a horse, a mustang. The creature stood tall and proud, its body slick with rain, every line of muscle taut with restrained energy. Its coat was a stormy gray, almost silver where the lightning caught it, and its mane hung in soaked tangles over strong shoulders. Dark, intelligent eyes locked onto hers, unwavering, fearless. He was younger than a seasoned stallion, but no colt, somewhere around 6 or 7 years old by her guess. A survivor. A fighter. Elowen gaped at him, heart thundering louder than the storm. She had lived around wild horses all her life, had spent her youth learning their moods, their fears, their silent language. Mustangs avoided humans, fled at the scent of them. Yet here he was, standing on her porch, knocking. The horse lifted a hoof and tapped it again against the porch wood. Thud. Thud. A shiver ran down her spine, more from recognition than fear. "This isn't happening," she whispered, clutching the door frame. The horse, no, the Mustang, blinked slowly, water dripping from his long lashes. He didn't budge, didn't flinch, as though he had come here for her and her alone. For a wild moment, Elowen thought about slamming the door, about pretending this was just another trick of the storm. But something in those eyes, something ancient and unspoken, pinned her to the spot. She stepped outside. The rain instantly soaked her clothes, plastering them to her frame. She waved her arms half-heartedly, trying to shoo the Mustang away. "Go on, boy. Find shelter. I'm not your keeper." The horse didn't move. Instead, he lifted his hoof again, tapping a deliberate rhythm against the wood, more insistent this time. "Damn it," she muttered. The storm whipped around her, seizing her hair like angry fingers. The horse remained perfectly still, as if he were carved from the very mountains around them. Finally, she broke. "All right," she said through gritted teeth. "You want something? Show me." The Mustang turned, walked a few steps, paused, looked over his shoulder, an invitation. With a low growl of frustration, at the horse, at herself, at the universe, Elowen yanked on her boots and pulled a jacket over her soaked flannel. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped off the porch, following the silver specter into the storm. They moved through the trees, the wind wailing in the pines above like ghosts mourning forgotten names. Mud sucked at her boots, branches clawed at her jacket. The beam of the flashlight barely pierced the darkness ahead. Still, the Mustang, already baptized in her mind as Whistler for the strange way the storm seemed to sing through his presence, moved with certainty, as if he knew where he was leading her, as if he trusted her to follow. Elowen's mind screamed warnings, but her heart, traitorous and aching, urged her forward. Tonight, in the heart of Crescent Hollow's wild storm, something old was stirring back to life inside her, something she thought she had buried alongside her shattered dreams. Something that looked suspiciously like hope. The rain pelted down harder as Elowen trudged after Whistler, the beam of her flashlight jittering across the tangled underbrush. The storm's fury had not relented. It snarled through the black pines, wrenching branches from their moorings and driving sheets of icy water against her face. The Mustang moved ahead of her, just beyond easy reach, his coat glistening like quicksilver under the flashes of lightning. Every few steps he would pause, look back over his shoulder with those steady, commanding eyes, then continue deeper into the trees. Elowen stumbled over a hidden root, cursing under her breath. The cold had seeped into her jeans and boots, turning her legs sluggish. Fear gnawed at her belly, not the sharp, immediate terror of danger but a deeper, old fear, the fear of surrender, of trusting something or someone again. Memories crawled up from the muddy corners of her mind. She was back under the brutal stadium lights, the roar of the crowd buzzing in her ears, the flaring nostrils of her horse ahead, the jump coming too fast. She remembered the slip, the sudden tilt of the world, and the sickening sensation of falling. Elowen shook her head violently, banishing the image. Focus. One step at a time. The trail Whistler chose wound sharply uphill, weaving through thick groves of cedar and fir. At one point, the Mustang stopped and tossed his head, urging her forward. The way his muscles rippled beneath his coat, even rain-soaked, spoke of untamed strength. He was clearly in his prime, strong yet lean, perhaps only a few years from the wild desert ranges where his ancestors once ran free. A branch snapped off to her left, and Elowen instinctively swung her light toward the noise. A figure loomed briefly in the darkness, a dog, scrappy and small, its coat dark with mud and rain. It wagged its tail once, uncertain, before slinking toward Whistler. Elowen lowered the flashlight slightly, squinting through the storm. The dog, a wiry mutt with one floppy ear and a scar slicing across its muzzle, paused beside the horse. Its ribs were visible beneath the soaked fur, and it walked with a slight limp. "Where the hell did you come from?" Elowen murmured. The dog gave a soft, hoarse bark, almost more a cough than a sound. A survivor, she thought grimly. Like all of them, she had never seen the dog around Crescent Hollow before. No collar, no tag, just a creature hardened by the wilderness and clinging to something larger for direction. The dog, later she would call him Bran, after a mythic wolf from her grandfather's stories, fell into step beside Whistler like it had always belonged there. Whistler gave no sign of surprise or disapproval. He simply turned and pressed forward. Elowen had no choice but to follow, weaving between gnarled trees and slick rocks. Her flashlight caught glimpses of the world beyond the trail, pools of water glinting like molten silver, broken fences where old ranches had once sprawled, the abandoned skeletons of a life left behind. Above them, the storm cracked the sky open again, illuminating for a brief moment the landscape ahead. A fallen tree, splintered and hollow, lying across a shallow ravine. Whistler stopped. He stamped a hoof, and Bran gave a nervous whimper. Elowen approached cautiously, stepping beside the mustang. She shone the light down and gasped. A figure lay in the mud below the fallen tree. Small, unmoving. Elowen slid down the bank without thinking, boots slipping. When she reached the bottom, the flashlight revealed a young mustang foal trapped beneath the broken limb, legs twisted awkwardly in the debris. Its coat was a soft steel gray, matted with rain and mud. Its sides heaved in shallow, panicked breaths. "Oh no," she breathed. Elowen dropped to her knees, assessing the situation. The branch wasn't crushing the foal completely, but it was heavy enough to pin it. She set the flashlight between her teeth and braced herself against the slick earth. Years of instinct took over. Memories of late nights in stables, of emergency rescues during competitions, of whispered prayers spoken into sweat-drenched manes. Gritting her teeth, she shoved at the branch. It shifted slightly. She pushed again, this time putting all her weight behind it. Inch by inch, the limb rolled off, freeing the foal's twisted legs. The young horse didn't move. Panic gnawed at her. Gently, she ran her hands over its limbs, checking for breaks. No obvious fractures, but the foal was cold, shocky, dangerously weak. Whistler watched silently from above, rain sliding down his strong neck in gleaming rivulets. Bran whimpered again, circling anxiously. "I can't carry him alone," Elowen muttered. Even as she said it, she knew she would find a way. She pulled off her sodden jacket and wrapped it around the tiny frame, lifting the foal with a grunt of effort. It was lighter than she expected, painfully so. Step by agonizing step, she climbed the embankment, boots slipping and scraping against the mud. Whistler moved beside her, and somehow she drew strength from his silent presence. At the top she staggered. The foal's head lolled against her shoulder, stirred, breath faint against her neck. "We have to get him back," she whispered to Whistler, to Bran, to herself. "We can't leave him." The mustang snorted softly and began walking ahead again, this time at a gentler pace, matching hers. Together, they navigated the treacherous woods back toward the cabin, a strange little caravan stitched together by desperation and trust. Whistler led. Bran guarded the rear, glancing nervously into the shadows. Elowen's muscles screamed with exhaustion, her back aching from the weight and the strain. But she didn't stop, because somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the years of bitterness and fear, the old Elowen stirred, the one who had once believed she could save the broken, the wild, the lost. As the cabin's faint outline emerged through the mist and trees, relief flooded her so sharply that it almost brought her to her knees. Whistler paused at the edge of the clearing, nostrils flaring. Bran pressed close against her leg, shaking. Elowen stumbled up the porch steps and kicked the door open. Warmth hit her like a wave, the fire still crackling, casting golden light across the wooden floor. She laid the foal gently on an old patchwork quilt near the hearth. It whimpered weakly, but didn't resist. Whistler approached the doorway, stopping just shy of crossing the threshold. Rain poured off his coat, pooling at his hooves. His eyes met hers, dark and endless and knowing. "You're not coming in," she said softly, "but you're not leaving either." Outside, the storm began to ease, the thunder retreating into the distant hills. A soft mist rolled over Crescent Hollow, blurring the edges of the world into something half-dreamed. Inside the cabin, Elowen sank to her knees beside the foal, Bran curling up at her side, a scrappy, muddy sentinel. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't want to be. Inside the cabin, the fire fought valiantly against the damp that clung to everything. Smoke curled lazily upward, filling the small space with the scent of burning pine and something deeper. The raw, metallic edge of blood and fear. Elowen knelt beside the foal, her jacket still wrapped around its trembling body. Ash, the name came to her without conscious thought, was so still she could barely believe there was life left in him at all. His coat, now that she could see it clearly, was a soft dove gray, peppered with darker spots along the spine. His mane, little more than a wet, tangled tuft, plastered against his slender neck. Ash looked too small for survival. His ribs were visible beneath the thin layer of flesh, each breath shallow and unsteady. One of his hind legs bore a nasty scrape from where the fallen tree had pinned him. Not deep enough to be deadly, but enough to have drained what little strength he had. Bran, the scrappy mutt with the scarred muzzle and limping gait, circled the foal once before curling up nearby, his wary eyes never leaving Elowin. Trust, for both animal and woman, was something that came slowly and painfully, earned drop by reluctant drop. Elowin sighed, her breath shaky. She rummaged through the battered wooden cabinet by the hearth, pulling out an old flannel blanket, a half-empty bottle of antiseptic, and a roll of gauze she had sworn she'd never need again. As she worked, cleaning Ash's wound with careful trembling hands, the memories rose unbidden. It had been nearly 5 years ago, that night in Wyoming, when everything had shattered. She had been at the height of her career, the golden girl with the fearless smile and the world at her boots. Crowds cheered her name, trainers lined up with contracts, and she had believed, with the foolish certainty of youth, that nothing could touch her. Until it did. The fall had been spectacular, catastrophic. One wrong move, one broken rein, a fracture that had nearly severed her spine, and a betrayal that left her stranded alone in a hospital bed, forgotten by the very people who had once praised her as untouchable. Ash whimpered, a small, broken sound that cut deeper than the cold ever could. Elowin wiped her eyes roughly with the sleeve of her flannel shirt. She hadn't cried in years, refused to. But something about this tiny creature, fighting for every breath, cracked open something she had buried too long. She finished bandaging Ash's leg and settled him closer to the fire. Bran shifted to lie protectively near the foal's side, his scruffy body a shield against the cold. Outside, Whistler remained a silent sentinel under the awning of the porch, his head lowered against the rain. Elowin stood slowly, joints protesting. She tossed another log onto the fire and dragged an old rocking chair closer. For a long moment, she simply watched them, the battered horse, the broken dog, the wild mustang standing guard, and herself. A family of castaways. The clock on the mantel ticked into the early hours of morning. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she refused to sleep. Instead, she brewed a weak cup of coffee on the wood stove and settled into the chair, hands wrapped around the battered mug. It wasn't until the third cup, and the third time she checked Ash's breathing, that she noticed something else. Movement at the window. Her heart jumped into her throat. She set the cup down with a clatter and grabbed the shotgun, crossing to the door with slow, measured steps. But when she flung it open, it wasn't a person she found. It was another horse. This one was different from Whistler, smaller, leaner, with a coarse buckskin coat and a single white blaze down his forehead. He stood uncertainly a few feet beyond the porch, dripping wet, his sides heaving as if he had run a long way to find them. Behind him stood a figure, half shrouded by the mist and rain. A woman, slender and willowy, wrapped in a patched oilskin coat that flapped around her knees. Her hair, a bright auburn even in the gloom, was plastered to her sharp, fox-like face. She approached with her hands raised, palms outward, a universal sign of peace. "I'm sorry to come uninvited," she called over the rain, her voice hoarse but steady. "Name's Cassidy Wren. My horse got spooked by the storm. I've been trying to find shelter all night." Elowin studied her, lowering the shotgun slightly but not relaxing. Cassidy was younger than herself, perhaps late 20s, with eyes that were too sharp, too knowing for someone so young. Life, it seemed, had not been particularly kind to her either. There was a guardedness in her stance, the way she kept glancing behind her, as if expecting something, or someone, worse to emerge from the woods. Reluctantly, Elowin stepped aside. "Get in before you freeze." Cassidy led the buckskin horse, later introduced as Dusty, a 3-year-old gelding with a spirited but skittish temperament, under the awning. She tied him loosely beside Whistler, who eyed the newcomer but didn't protest. Inside, Cassidy shrugged off her soaked coat and crouched near the fire, extending her pale, freckled hands toward the warmth. Her gaze landed almost immediately on Ash and softened. "That's a wild one, ain't he?" she said quietly. Elowin nodded, studying her. Cassidy's fingers were calloused, her nails bitten short, a rider's hands, or perhaps someone who had learned to fight for everything they owned. Not unlike Elowin herself. Bran growled low in his throat but didn't move from Ash's side. Cassidy smiled slightly. "Good boy," she said, tossing him a scrap of jerky from her pocket. Bran sniffed it suspiciously before accepting it, his tail thudding weakly against the floor. "Looks like you've got yourself a whole circus here." Cassidy added, her voice lighter, but her eyes wary. Elowen grunted, pouring another mug of weak coffee and handing it over. Not by choice. The rain lessened into a steady drizzle, tapping softly against the window panes. For a long while, neither woman spoke. The fire crackled, Bran snored quietly, and Ash shifted in his sleep, pressing closer to the quilt. Elowen stared into the flames and wondered, not for the first time that night, what the hell she was doing. Opening her door to strangers, caring for things too fragile to survive, hoping for something better than survival. But when she glanced at Ash, at the faint rise and fall of his ribs, the stubborn flutter of life that refused to surrender, she knew. She was doing exactly what she was meant to do. Morning crept slowly into the valley, reluctant and gray. The rain had faded into a soft mist that clung low to the ground, veiling Crescent Hollow in a dreamlike haze. From the single window of the cabin, the world looked washed clean, but inside, it was a different story. The cabin smelled of damp wool, smoke, and the sharp tang of antiseptic. Elowen crouched by the fire, watching the small, fragile body of Ash as he slept on the patchwork quilt. His sides rose and fell in uneven rhythm, but it was a rhythm nonetheless, a sign that the fight for life continued. A thin sheen of sweat coated his flanks, and the occasional twitch of his ears betrayed dreams or discomfort she couldn't soothe. Elowen's muscles ached from the night's efforts. She hadn't slept, she hadn't dared. Every time Ash made the slightest sound, she jolted awake, heart pounding. Rationally, she knew the foal's chances were slim. Exposure, injury, trauma. Any one of them could tip him over the edge. But irrational hope kept her anchored there, hands hovering near him, ready to intervene against invisible battles she couldn't control. Bran snored lightly from his corner, one paw twitching in some dog dream. Whistler remained just outside the door, the mist curling around his powerful frame like a living thing. He had stood there all night, unmoving, his head tilted slightly toward the cabin, as if tethered by a duty only he understood. Elowen pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, suppressing a shiver that had little to do with the cold. Her body was here, crouched by the fire, but her mind drifted elsewhere, to another place, another time. She remembered the hospital room, sterile and too white, the beeping machines, the pity in the nurse's eyes. She had lain there for weeks, skin pale against the stiff cotton sheets, rage and grief warring inside her, until she felt hollowed out. No one had stood at her door, waiting. No one had come knocking through the long nights filled with pain and doubt. She had been alone then. She had chosen it after. But now, as she watched Ash's tiny body stubbornly cling to life, she wondered, had she really chosen solitude? Or had it been forced upon her until she wore it like armor? Cassidy stirred behind her, muttering something incoherent as she shifted under a pile of old horse blankets. Elowen glanced over her shoulder. The younger woman looked impossibly small, curled into herself. Her fiery hair fanned across the worn couch like a splash of spilled paint. Dusty, her buckskin gelding, stood tethered just outside with Whistler, their silhouettes barely visible through the misted glass. Cassidy Wren was a puzzle Elowen wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Everything about her, the nervous dart of her eyes, the too easy grin that never reached her eyes, spoke of someone who had been taught not to trust. Someone who had learned the hard way that promises were lighter than smoke. Still, she had shown up in the storm. Still, she had stayed through the long, grim hours without complaint, even helping to tend the foal when Elowen's hands had begun to shake too badly. Elowen turned back to the fire, dragging a hand through her tangled hair. The ache behind her ribs tightened again. She didn't want this. She didn't want to care. But Ash, tiny, trembling Ash, made it impossible not to. A soft, broken whinny snapped her attention back to the foal. Ash struggled to lift his head, blinking bleary eyes that barely seemed able to focus. His legs kicked feebly against the quilt, an instinctive attempt to rise. "No, no, little one," Elowen murmured, reaching out to steady him. Her hand, rough from years of reins and rope, trembled slightly as it brushed his damp neck. "Not yet. Rest first, fight later." Ash exhaled a shuddery breath and sagged back against the quilt. The connection between them, fragile as spider silk, tightened. Elowen sat back on her heels, hands falling limply into her lap. She could feel the walls she had built around her heart, walls mortared with pride and fear, begin to crack. Not with a grand explosion, but with the slow, steady pressure of existence, of needing to care, of choosing to. Outside, Whistler stomped a hoof, his breath puffing in white clouds against the chill air. Elowen looked up, meeting his gaze through the window. He hadn't left. He hadn't given up. Neither would she. Cassidy stirred again, waking fully this time. She sat up slowly, grimacing as she rubbed at her stiff back. Her green eyes, sharp and alert now, found Elowen immediately. "How's the kid?" she rasped, her voice thick with sleep. Elowen shrugged one shoulder, unable or unwilling to put hope into words. "Still breathing." Cassidy swung her legs over the side of the couch and stood, stretching her arms over her head. She was taller than Elowen had first realized, all lean muscle and sinew, built like someone who had spent her life either climbing fences or running from something. She wore a battered leather wristband on her left wrist, stitched crudely with initials Elowen didn't recognize. Cassidy crossed the room and crouched beside Ash, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't reach for him, just looked, assessed. "He's tougher than he looks," she said after a long moment. Elowen barked out a laugh that surprised them both. "You think so?" Cassidy grinned crookedly. "Takes one to know one." Silence fell again, but it was less strained than before. Somewhere deep within the cabin, a small ember of understanding flickered into life. They were all broken in some way. Lost, abandoned, scrapped together from the pieces life had left behind. But maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The day slipped by slowly, each hour measured in shallow breaths and restless shifts. Elowen and Cassidy took turns wiping Ash down, offering him small sips of water, whispering encouragement neither really believed he could hear. As dusk approached, the mist thickened again, swallowing the landscape beyond the porch. The world felt smaller somehow, compressed into the space between the walls of the cabin, the circle of bodies around the fire. Elowen sat on the floor now, one hand resting lightly against Ash's warm flank, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her palm. It wasn't much. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was life. It was hope. And after so many years of drifting through the ashes of what she had once been, it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't beyond saving after all. The morning sun struggled against a sky still heavy with mist, casting only a weak, watery light across Crescent Hollow. The storm had spent itself at last, leaving behind a world that felt scrubbed raw and trembling, as if the very earth were relearning how to breathe. Elowen stood on the cabin's sagging porch, arms crossed tight against the lingering chill. The familiar smells of wet pine and damp earth filled her lungs, grounding her. From her perch, she could see Whistler grazing just beyond the clearing, his silver-gray coat shimmering faintly as the first rays of sunlight caught the moisture still clinging to his hide. Nearby, Dusty, the younger, lighter-built buckskin gelding Cassidy had brought, snorted softly at something unseen, his nerves still taut from the chaos of the night before. Ash remained inside, curled near the fire. Bran, the scrappy little mutt with the scarred muzzle and defiant spirit, lay stretched across the threshold, keeping one sleepy eye on both the foal and the horizon. Cassidy Wren was somewhere deeper in the trees, gathering kindling. The younger woman had insisted on pulling her weight despite Elowen's half-hearted protests. Cassidy's wiry frame, still wrapped in that battered oilskin coat, had disappeared into the woods with the determined stride of someone used to doing hard things alone. Elowen turned her attention back to Whistler, who had paused his grazing and was now watching her with an unsettling intensity. The mustang's posture was loose but deliberate, ears pricked forward, stance balanced and inviting. She knew that look. She had spent years reading horses, listening to the subtle language of their bodies when their voices could not speak. Whistler was asking her for something. Elowen swallowed hard, feeling her pulse quicken. Memories she thought buried clawed their way to the surface. The weight of a saddle under her hands, the breathless rush of flight, the sheer electric connection between rider and steed. And the fall. Always, always the fall. Whistler took a step closer, and the muscles along Elowen's spine locked up. She wanted to move away, to retreat back into the safety of her walls and her silence. But her boots remained planted on the worn wood. Another step. Another breath she forgot to take. Finally, Whistler stopped just in front of her. His muzzle lowered slightly, soft breath puffing against her jacket. A silent offer. Elowen stared at him, heart hammering against her ribs. Logic screamed at her. She hadn't ridden in years. She had promised herself she wouldn't. Too dangerous, too painful. Too much of a reminder of everything she had lost. And yet, her hand lifted without her permission. The moment her fingers brushed Whistler's rain-damp coat, something shifted between them. It wasn't magic, or fate, or any of the foolish things she might have once believed in. It was something simpler. Older. A mutual recognition of broken pieces fitting together. Whistler didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into her touch, pressing the solid weight of his shoulder against her palm. His coat was coarser than she remembered, thicker, built for survival, but warm and thrumming with life. Her throat tightened. For so long, she had told herself that life with horses belonged to another Elowen, someone naive and foolish, who thought love could shield you from breaking. But here, under the gray sky and the watchful pines, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. She hadn't left horses. She had left herself. Slowly, cautiously, she moved alongside Whistler's broad frame. Her fingers brushed his withers, then the curve of his ribs. She half expected him to shy away, to lose patience with her hesitation. He didn't. Instead, he shifted his stance subtly, presenting his side in a way that could only be interpreted as invitation. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The idea of climbing onto his back, no saddle, no reins, nothing but trust, made her stomach twist. Her legs remembered the last time all too well, the split-second betrayal of momentum, the sickening drop, the bone-crunching end. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the memories back into their cage. When she opened them, Whistler was still there, waiting, patient, unafraid. Elowen, a voice called from the trees. She turned sharply to see Cassidy emerging from the mist, a bundle of wood cradled in her arms. Her auburn hair was plastered to her temples, and dark circles ringed her sharp green eyes, but she grinned when she spotted the scene unfolding. "Didn't mean to interrupt," she said lightly, setting the wood down by the porch steps. "But it's a hell of a sight." Elowen flushed, embarrassed by how exposed she felt. Cassidy's smile softened. "He trusts you. That's rare. Don't waste it." She disappeared into the cabin without another word, leaving Elowen alone again with the decision burning a hole in her chest. One last shaky breath. Then she moved. Her boots scuffed against the porch as she hoisted herself up, muscles protesting the unfamiliar movement. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't confident. But somehow, she swung herself onto Whistler's bare back. For a moment, she simply sat there, stiff and trembling, half expecting the Mustang to bolt, but Whistler only shifted his weight slightly, adjusting to her presence. His body was solid beneath her, the warmth of him soaking into her frozen limbs. Elowen closed her eyes. The world faded. The cabin, the dog, the injuries, the past. All that remained was the steady rise and fall of Whistler's breath and the quiet certainty that for the first time in years, she was exactly where she was meant to be. She pressed her heels gently against his sides, and Whistler began to move, slow and sure. Each step was deliberate, almost reverent, carrying her away from the porch, from the ghosts, from the cage she had built around her own heart. They made a wide circle through the misty clearing. Dusty watched from a distance, his ears flicking curiously. Bran barked once, sharp and approving. When they returned to the porch, Elowen slid down, legs shaking from more than just exertion. Whistler bumped her shoulder lightly with his muzzle, a playful nudge. A real, uncontrollable laugh broke from her lips, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in far too long. Cassidy reappeared at the door, holding 2 chipped mugs of coffee. She tossed one toward Elowen, who caught it with clumsy hands. "You're not broken," Cassidy said, her voice quiet but firm. "You just forgot you were whole." Elowen swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Maybe she hadn't been saving Ash. Maybe Ash and Whistler, and even the stubborn little mutt curled in the doorway, had been saving her all along. The mist had thinned by afternoon, pulling back like a frayed curtain to reveal a world shimmering with cautious new light. Crescent Hollow breathed again, damp but alive, the pines dripping crystals of rainwater into the hush of the clearing. Elowen sat on the cabin's front steps, a battered mug of lukewarm coffee resting between her palms. Bran dozed against her hip, his small scarred body twitching now and then with dreams. Whistler grazed nearby, his silver-gray coat dappled with patches of drying mud. Ash slept fitfully inside, the foal's recovery slow but steady. Cassidy could be heard somewhere deeper in the woods, her voice drifting back in scraps of a song half forgotten. For the first time in years, Eowyn felt a strange, uneasy sense of balance. Like she was standing on the fragile crust of a frozen pond. One wrong step and everything would crack wide open. Still, she let herself savor it, just for a breath. Then she heard it, the soft, deliberate crunch of tires on gravel. Every muscle in her body stiffened. Visitors were rare out here, unwanted ones, even more so. She rose slowly, setting the mug down with a soft clink. Bran stirred at her side, ears pricking toward the sound. The truck came into view through the thinning mist, a battered old Ford, blue paint peeling like sunburned skin, with rust blooming along the wheel wells. It pulled up at the edge of the clearing and cut the engine with a reluctant sputter. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Jude Carter. Eowyn's heart stumbled in her chest. Jude hadn't changed much, and yet he had. He was still tall, broad-shouldered, built like the draft horses he used to train. His face was leaner now, though, the lines around his mouth deeper, etched by years spent chasing things that maybe didn't want to be caught. His dark hair, once kept boyishly tousled, now bore the first hints of gray at the temples. His eyes, those damnable steady blue eyes, found her immediately, and something flickered in them that made her want to bolt. He wore a battered brown jacket over a plaid shirt and jeans, dust caking the cuffs. A man who looked like he belonged anywhere but here. Yet somehow, he had found her anyway. For a long, taut moment, neither of them moved. Then Jude lifted one hand, a small, tentative wave. "Hey, El." His voice hadn't changed, still rough around the edges, still far too familiar. Eowyn crossed her arms over her chest. "Took you long enough." A wry smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Would have been sooner if you hadn't dropped off the face of the damn earth." Bran barked once, a sharp warning that earned a chuckle from Jude. He crouched slightly, letting the dog sniff him before offering a hand. "Who's the tough guy?" Eowyn didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice. Bran gave a final huff before deeming Jude unworthy of further notice and flopped back down. Jude straightened, eyes sweeping the clearing, the cabin, the horses, the weather-beaten woman glaring at him like she could set him on fire if she wanted. "You look good," he said, almost gently. Eowyn snorted, turning away to hide the sudden sting in her eyes. "Liar." He chuckled again, softer this time. "Fair enough." There was an awkward beat before he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her, arm extended like someone offering a truce. She hesitated before snatching it from his hand. It was a flyer. A local event announcement, printed on cheap, weatherproof paper. Crescent Hollow exhibition race. No competition, no crowns. Just the ride. Eowyn's stomach twisted. "It's not a real race," Jude said quickly, reading her expression. "No sponsors. No prizes. Just a chance. For riders who've got nothing left to prove, or think they don't." She stared at the paper, feeling the old fear coil tight inside her. The words blurred slightly, but she blinked it away. "Why are you here, Jude?" Her voice came out rough, ragged. He shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets, shoulders hunching slightly. For the first time he looked uncertain. Jude Carter, the man who once barked orders across arenas and broke wild colts like snapping twigs, looked like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. "I came because I owed you," he said finally. "An apology, a real one." Eowyn froze. He looked away, jaw clenching. "I pushed you too hard, El. Back then, after the fall. I thought if I could just get you back on a horse, you'd heal. I didn't understand that healing isn't about pushing. It's about time, about letting yourself be broken for a while." His voice dropped rough with regret. "I should have been there, not as your trainer, as your friend." The silence between them thickened, heavy with years of unsaid things. Eowyn squeezed the flyer in her hand until the paper crinkled. Anger, pain, something dangerously close to relief warred in her chest. "It's a little late," she said quietly. Jude nodded once, solemn. "I know." The cabin door creaked open behind her. Cassidy poked her head out, auburn hair tied messily at the nape of her neck. Her sharp green eyes took in the scene with quick calculation. She didn't say anything, just raised an eyebrow, offering Eowyn a silent question. "You good?" Eowyn gave the barest nod. Cassidy disappeared back inside without a word. Jude shifted his weight, scuffing a boot against the gravel. "I'm not here to drag you back. You don't owe anyone anything, not the crowd, not the past. But if you ever want to remember what it felt like to ride because you loved it, not because you had to, he tapped the flyer. That's where I'll be. He turned without waiting for an answer, heading back toward the truck. Elowen watched him go, the flyer limp in her hand, her heart thudding in her ears. Whistler wandered over, bumping her shoulder with his broad head. His touch was grounding, solid, real. Cassidy's voice floated from inside, dry and amused. You gonna stand there brooding all day? Or are you coming in for lunch? Elowen laughed under her breath, a short, sharp sound. She folded the flyer carefully and tucked it into her back pocket. No decisions today, but maybe, just maybe, there was a future that didn't end in silence after all. The sun broke over Crescent Hollow like a quiet promise, its gold light spilling across the valley, peeling away the lingering mist. The world smelled of damp earth and pine sap, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Elowen stood outside the cabin, Whistler shifting restlessly beside her, the flyer Jude had given her still tucked into the pocket of her worn jacket. She hadn't made the decision quickly. For 2 nights after Jude's visit, she had stared at that flyer, tracing the inked words with trembling fingers. Fear had gnawed at her edges, whispering that she would fall again, fail again, that she had no place anymore among those who could still ride free. But when morning came and she stepped outside to find Whistler waiting, his silver coat flashing under the sun like armor, she knew. It wasn't about winning. It was about remembering. Cassidy leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching her with a smirk tugging at her lips. Took you long enough. Elowen shook her head, amused despite herself. Cassidy's auburn hair was still a mess of wind-blown strands, her green eyes bright with mischief, but there was something steadier in her now, like staying here, even for a little while, had anchored her. Dusty, Cassidy's buckskin gelding, pawed the ground impatiently nearby, as if picking up his rider's restless energy. Bran barked once, circling Elowen's boots before settling down with a huff, tail thumping against the dirt. "You're sure about this?" Cassidy asked, not teasing now. Elowen didn't answer with words. She simply swung herself onto Whistler's bare back, feeling the old rhythm click into place, and turned him toward the narrow trail that would lead them down to the exhibition grounds. The Crescent Hollow exhibition was smaller than Elowen had imagined. A rough oval had been staked out with worn flags. The crowd gathered loosely along the edges, sipping coffee from paper cups and stomping their boots against the cold. There were no cameras, no flashing lights, no thunderous announcers calling out names and odds, just a scattering of faces, some familiar, some curious, none expectant. It wasn't about glory here. It was about movement, about being. Jude spotted her first, standing near the judge's tent, a rickety canvas affair more designed to shield from rain than to host any real pomp. His relief was obvious, a slow grin breaking across his face as he lifted a hand in greeting. She nodded once, heart hammering in her chest. The announcer, a wiry woman named Maggie Dean with a voice like warm whiskey, stepped up to the battered microphone. Maggie had been a fixture of small-town Colorado rodeos for years. Tall, broad-shouldered, her brown braid peppered with gray, and a laugh that rumbled up from somewhere near her boots. She wore a faded denim jacket and a well-loved Stetson pulled low over her brow. "Next up," Maggie called, her voice carrying easily across the grounds, "Elowen Grace, riding in just for the joy of it." There was a polite ripple of applause, some whistles, a few curious murmurs. Elowen caught snippets. Didn't she used to be? Thought she quit after the fall. She looks different. She ignored them all. Cassidy gave her a 2-fingered salute from the sidelines. Dusty stomped and tossed his head, almost knocking Cassidy off balance. Elowen grinned, the tension in her chest loosening just slightly. She nudged Whistler forward, feeling the mustang shift beneath her with an eagerness that mirrored her own hidden nerves. No saddle, no reins, just trust, just breath. The world narrowed to the track, the sky, and the horse beneath her. Maggie dropped the handkerchief to signal the start. Whistler surged forward, not with the blinding explosion of a racehorse, but with a grounded, steady power that built with each stride. Elowen leaned low, her body moving as one with his, the wind rushing past her face like a baptism. They weren't fast. They didn't need to be. Each hoofbeat struck the earth like a drum, marking time, not with seconds but with heartbeats. Elowen didn't hear the crowd. Didn't hear anything but Whistler's breathing, the steady rhythm of the earth meeting them, and the way her own heartbeat synchronized with it. Freedom wasn't a finish line. It was this. By the second lap, the wind had whipped her hair free from its loose braid, streaming behind her like a banner. Her cheeks stung from the cold, from the rush of air. She laughed aloud, a wild, fierce sound torn from somewhere deep inside her. Whistler responded with a joyous toss of his head, stretching into the final straightaway. They crossed the makeshift finish without fanfare. No roaring crowd, no trophy, just a few scattered claps, a few shouts of encouragement. It was enough. It was everything. Elowen slowed Whistler to a canter, then a trot, then a walk, her body trembling with the flood of emotions she couldn't even name. Jude met her near the end of the track, Dusty sidling nervously at his side. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just reached out and squeezed her arm once, solid and steady. Cassidy was there too, whistling through her fingers with a grin so wide it might have cracked her face. "You looked like you belonged up there," she said. Elowen slid down from Whistler's back, her legs shaking more from relief than exhaustion. "I did," she said simply. Ash waited in the truck bed Cassidy had brought, his small head poking out from under a tarp, blinking sleepily at the commotion. Bran wagged his tail furiously, leaping up to nose at her pockets for a treat. Elowen laughed again, dropping to one knee to ruffle the scrappy dog's ears. She had come here thinking she needed to prove something. Instead, she had remembered what she had never really lost. The sun dipped low behind the Wolfpine Mountains, casting long, honeyed shadows across the valley as Elowen drove the battered old truck back toward Crescent Hollow. The road wound through forests, still heavy with the scent of rain, gravel crunching under the tires in a steady, comforting rhythm. The town faded behind her without fanfare, just a handful of buildings tucked between hills and memory. Ash rested in a nest of blankets in the truck bed, his small head bobbing with each bump. Bran sat curled at Elowen's feet inside the cab, his one floppy ear twitching in half-sleep. Whistler followed behind, tied loosely with enough slack to move comfortably, his head low and his pace easy, trusting her without question. The flyer from the exhibition sat crumpled in the glove compartment now, forgotten. It had served its purpose. She hadn't ridden for the crowd, hadn't ridden for pride. She had ridden for herself, and for something older, deeper that she hadn't been able to name until now. Freedom. Hum. The gravel gave way to dirt as the cabin came into view, crouched like an old familiar sentinel among the trees. Smoke still curled from the chimney where Cassidy had kept the fire going, the comforting scent reaching her long before she saw the front porch. Cassidy Wren stepped out as the truck rumbled into the clearing, wiping her hands on the seat of her jeans. She looked the same as she had days before, tall, wiry, her unruly auburn hair tied back in a loose braid. But there was something softer around her eyes now, a cautious ease that hadn't been there before, a woman learning, slowly, to trust again. Cassidy waved once, a lazy, two-fingered salute that Elowen returned with a genuine smile tugging at her lips. Dusty, Cassidy's buckskin gelding, whinnied from the makeshift paddock they had built together out of fallen logs and old rope. His ears perked forward at the sight of Whistler, and the silver-gray Mustang answered with a deep, rumbling nicker that vibrated through the clearing like a living thing. Ash stirred in the truck bed, blinking sleepily against the setting sun. Elowen reached back to steady him with a gentle touch before cutting the engine. Bran jumped down first, tail wagging, and bounded toward Cassidy before thinking better of it and stopping a few paces short. Cassidy tossed him a scrap of jerky with a smirk. "Good to have you back," she said simply. Elowen didn't reply right away. She stepped down from the cab, stretching stiff muscles, and took a long moment to just breathe. The air smelled of wood smoke, pine, and wet earth. The sounds were the old, familiar ones. The soft murmur of horses shifting, the whisper of the wind threading through the trees. It wasn't the roar of a crowd or the blare of loudspeakers. It was better. She moved to untie Whistler, running her hands down his strong neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath his skin. He leaned into her touch, patient as always, grounding her. Together they led Ash into the cabin. The foal was stronger now, his step still wobbly but full of stubborn determination. Cassidy had set up a padded corner near the hearth, and Ash settled there almost immediately, curling into himself with a contented sigh. The night crept in, soft and sure. They ate dinner in comfortable silence, canned stew heated over the fire, thick slices of bread Cassidy had somehow coaxed from the battered oven. Bran dozed at Elowen's feet. Dusty and Whistler shared a hay net outside, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the ache inside Elowen dulled to something almost bearable. Later, when the stars blinked awake in the vast velvet sky, Elowen found herself sitting on the porch steps, the old blanket Cassidy had tossed over her shoulders tucked tight around her. Whistler stood a few paces away, his silhouette etched against the moonlight, ears flicking at every night sound. Ash slept inside, safe and warm. Cassidy dozed in the rocking chair, her head tipped back, one boot propped against the porch rail. The world was whole again, in its imperfect, beautiful way. Without thinking, Elowen rose and crossed the clearing to Whistler. The Mustang lifted his head, regarding her with eyes deep and dark as the mountains themselves. No words passed between them. There never needed to be. She swung herself onto his back with a practiced ease she hadn't known she still possessed. No saddle, no reins. Just trust, just belonging. Whistler shifted once, adjusting to her weight, and then he was moving, trotting smoothly toward the tree line. Bran gave a questioning bark, but didn't follow. He knew she would return. They slipped into the forest together, the mist curling low over the ground, the night full of the scent of pine and the rustle of unseen wings overhead. Elowen leaned forward, letting Whistler choose the path. She had spent too many years trying to control everything. Tonight, she would simply follow. The woods opened onto a meadow she hadn't known was there, tucked between the arms of two low hills. And waiting there, silent, patient, wild, was a herd of mustangs. There were at least a dozen of them, their coats a patchwork of colors, bays, grays, chestnuts, and blacks. They lifted their heads at her approach, nostrils flaring, ears pricking forward. Whistler hesitated at the edge of the clearing, then let out a low, rumbling nicker. One by one, the herd moved forward to greet him. They accepted him, and astonishingly, they accepted her too. The lead mare, a striking dun with a black mane and a jagged white blaze down her nose, stepped forward, her muscles taut and wary. She regarded Elowen with ancient eyes, then tossed her head and turned, cantering into the open field. The others followed. Whistler edged after them, and Elowen didn't stop him. She let herself melt into the motion, let the cool night air sting her cheeks and the earth drum beneath Whistler's hooves. They ran with the wild ones, under the endless sprawl of stars, and for the first time in a very long time, Elowen didn't feel broken. She didn't feel lost, she felt found. When they finally slowed, breathless and glowing with the effort, she pressed her face into Whistler's mane and whispered, "We're home." The Mustang shifted beneath her, steady and sure, as if he had known it all along. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not the ones that shout, but the ones that whisper. A lost soul finding its way home, a broken heart daring to heal, a wild spirit offering trust when it should have only known fear. Just like Elowen, we often believe we're too far gone, too wounded, too alone. But God has a way of sending his miracles quietly, through unexpected friendships, second chances, and the beauty of creation. If you feel lost today, remember that you are never forgotten. There is a purpose in every breath, a blessing waiting even in the darkest forests of our lives. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little hope. Leave a comment with Amen if you believe in the quiet miracles God places along our paths. Subscribe to our channel to be part of a growing family that believes in faith, love, and second chances. May God bless you and guide you always.